The morning sun reflected off the glass facade of the new Fleet Cyber Command Center with a blinding intensity. I stood at the edge of the perimeter, clutching my digital briefing tablet against my chest. The humid air of the naval base pressed against my civilian blazer, making the fabric feel heavy and restrictive. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the familiar flutter in my stomach that always came before a high-stakes operation. Today was not just any briefing. It was the culmination of 3 years of ghost work. I walked toward the main entrance, where the VIP reception was already in full swing. The sound of polished boots on marble and the low hum of expensive conversations filled the lobby. I saw the flash of silver hair and a chest full of ribbons before I even reached the security cordon. My father, Major General Arthur Sterling, was holding court near the center of the room. He stood with a rigid, old-school posture that seemed designed to make everyone else feel physically smaller. Arthur was surrounded by his usual circle of retired brass and active duty colonels who still worshipped his tank commander legacy. His voice boomed across the lobby, a deep baritone that had spent 40 years barking over the roar of diesel engines. He was laughing at a joke made by a man I recognized as a former logistics officer. I tried to slip past the group, hoping to reach the secure elevator without a confrontation. Luck was never on my side when it came to the Sterling family tradition of public humiliation. Arthur turned his head just as I reached the velvet rope, and his eyes narrowed with immediate, sharp recognition. The laughter in the group died down as he stepped out of the circle to intercept my path. He looked at my plain navy blazer and my sensible flats with a look of pure, unadulterated pity. My father did not see a lead architect of national security standing before him. He saw a daughter who had failed the family's warrior lineage to play with computers in a basement. "Where do you think you are going, Megan?" he asked, his voice dripping with a casual, biting condescension. "This area is reserved for the invited leadership and actual defenders of this nation." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks as the officers behind him began to whisper among themselves. I told him quietly that I was here for the Con Thanch ceremony and the subsequent tactical briefing. Arthur let out a short, harsh bark of a laugh that sounded like a dry cough. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crisp $20 bill, and held it out toward my face. "Why don't you make yourself useful for once and find the canteen near the staff entrance?" he said loudly. "Get a round of black coffees for these gentlemen since you are already dressed like the help." One of the colonels behind him chuckled, a sycophantic sound that made my grip on my tablet tighten until my knuckles turned white. Arthur waved the money at me again, his face a mask of arrogant certainty. "This is a house of war, Megan, not a library or a community college computer lab," he hissed, leaning in closer. "You should go find a seat in the very back of the public gallery if you want to watch the real professionals work." I looked him directly in the eyes, searching for even a glimmer of the man who used to read me stories before the army took his soul. I saw nothing but the cold steel of a man who believed power only came from the end of a gun barrel. I did not take the money, and I did not move away from the VIP line. The security guard at the gate looked nervous, his eyes darting between my father's general stare and the black lanyard peeking out of my pocket. Arthur noticed the guard's hesitation and stepped forward, his chest puffed out to show off his distinguished service cross. "This young lady is lost, son," Arthur told the guard with a fake paternal smile. "Please escort her to the civilian overflow area before she gets in the way of the Admiral's arrival." I felt the collective gaze of the room on my back, a heavy weight of judgment and misplaced superiority. I reached into my blazer and pulled out the matte black access card with the gold holographic eagle. I did not say a word as I tapped it against the high-security biometric scanner at the gate. The machine emitted a low, melodic chime that was significantly different from the standard beep of a guest pass. The light on the pillar didn't just turn green. It pulsed a deep, authoritative violet. This was the signal for a black site clearance level, the highest tier of access in the entire Department of Defense. The guard's eyes went wide as the automated glass barriers slid open with a hiss of pressurized air. Arthur stared at the violet light, his brow furrowed in genuine, angry confusion. "What kind of glitch is that?" he demanded, looking at the guard as if the man had just committed treason. "You need to recalibrate your equipment before every civilian techie in the building starts." Walking into the restricted zone. I stepped through the gate, feeling the cool air of the inner sanctum wash over me. I turned back for just a moment to see my father attempting to follow me through the barrier. The sensors immediately slammed the glass shut, nearly catching his expensive suit jacket in the mechanism. "Access denied," a calm, electronic voice announced throughout the lobby. "General Sterling, you are cleared for the observation deck only," the guard said, his voice now trembling slightly. "Please remain behind the yellow line for the duration of the secure movement phase." Arthur's face turned a deep, alarming shade of purple as he realized he was being barred from a room I had just entered. He began to shout something about his rank and his 30 years of service to the armored divisions. I didn't stay to listen to the rest of his tantrum. I walked down the long, white corridor that led to the heart of Project Aegis Ghost. Every 10 feet, a hidden camera tracked my gait and my retinas to ensure I was exactly who the system claimed I was. I reached the double steel doors of the command center, where my team was already waiting. These were the men and women my father would never understand, the silent warriors of the digital age. They didn't wear medals on their chests, but they held the power to blind an entire enemy hamjoy with a single keystroke. Major Evans, my primary military liaison, stepped forward and handed me a secure headset. "We are green across the board, ma'am," he said, with a crisp professional nod. "The Admiral is on deck, Kay, and the guests are being seated in the viewing gallery," Evans continued, his eyes focused on his monitor. I looked up at the one-way glass that separated the command center from the public auditorium. I could see my father sitting in the front row of the retired section, still looking agitated and red-faced. He was leaning over to a fellow officer, likely complaining about the disrespect of the new generation. He had no idea that he was sitting in a room I had designed from the ground up. Admiral Catherine Vance entered the room, and the entire command center snapped to a silent, respectful attention. She was a woman of legendary grit, the first to command a strike group in the Pacific under active cyber siege. She didn't look at the screens or the technicians first. She walked straight to me and extended her hand with a firm, genuine grip. "Megan, it is a privilege to finally see the architect in her own house," the Admiral said. I thanked her and noted that Operation Silent Sting was initialized and awaiting her final authorization. The Admiral nodded and looked up at the glass gallery, her eyes lingering on the rows of decorated men. "It is time we show them that the tip of the spear has changed," she said, with a sharp, knowing smile. She walked to the center podium and signaled for the curtains to be drawn back, revealing us to the audience. I stood directly to her right, my hand hovering over the primary command console. I saw the exact moment my father spotted me through the glass. He stood up halfway, his mouth hanging open, as he processed the sight of his daughter standing next to a 4-star admiral. The auditorium went into a shocked silence as the Admiral leaned into the microphone. "Welcome to the future of American power," she announced, her voice echoing with absolute authority. "Today, we launch Project Aegis Ghost, the most advanced defensive system ever conceived by the human mind." The Admiral paused and placed a hand on my shoulder, looking out at the crowd of retired generals. "This system was not built by a committee of bureaucrats or a team of contractors," she stated clearly. "It was the singular vision of our lead strategist, Megan Sterling, who currently holds the highest civilian rank in this command." I watched my father's face crumble as the reality of my position finally shattered his fragile ego. The $20 bill he had tried to give me was nowhere to be seen. I began the demonstration, my fingers moving across the haptic interface with a speed and precision that felt like second nature. On the massive screens above us, a simulated enemy fleet began to vanish, one ship at a time. We weren't using missiles or torpedoes. We were using the very code the enemy relied on to breathe. I explained the mechanics of the asymmetric strike, my voice calm and steady despite the adrenaline. The audience sat in a state of stunned, motionless awe as the power of the project became undeniable. When the final simulation ended with a total silent victory, the room remained quiet for 3 long heartbeats. Then, the Admiral was the first to clap, followed quickly by the active duty officers in the front rows. Soon, the entire auditorium was on its feet, a sea of uniforms and suits giving a standing ovation. I looked at my father, who was the last to rise, his movements slow and mechanical. He looked at me not with pride, but with the terrifying realization that his world was gone. The briefing ended, and the VIPs were allowed down into the command center for a brief, supervised walkthrough. My father approached the perimeter of my station, his eyes darting between my face and the complex data streams on my monitors. He looked like he wanted to speak, but for the first time in his life, he couldn't find the words. I saw the Major General, who had commanded thousands of men, look utterly lost in a room of servers. He finally cleared his throat, a small, weak sound that carried no authority. "Megan, I had no idea you were involved in something of this magnitude," he stammered, his hands trembling at his sides. I simply looked at him, my expression neutral and professional, as if I were speaking to a stranger. "You wouldn't have known, General, because you never bothered to ask what I actually did," I replied. "You were too busy looking for a uniform to realize that the warheads moved beyond the parade ground." He flinched at the use of his title instead of the word father. The Admiral walked over, sensing the tension, and looked at my father with a cool, appraising stare. "General Sterling, you must be proud to have raised such a critical asset to our national security," she said. Arthur nodded frantically, trying to reclaim some shred of his dignity in front of the active command. "Of course, Admiral. I always knew Megan had a brilliant mind for the technical side of things," he lied. I saw the Admiral's eyes flicker with a momentary flash of disgust at his blatant dishonesty. She didn't give him the satisfaction of a response, turning instead to ask me about the next phase of the rollout. I walked away from my father, leaving him standing in the middle of the room he had just been barred from. He was a relic, a ghost of a military that valued volume over intelligence and muscle over mind. I spent the next 2 hours fielding questions from senators and cabinet members who actually understood the stakes. My father watched from the corner, a lonely figure in a room full of people who no longer cared about his medals. 6 months passed before I heard from him again in any significant way. I had been promoted to deputy director, a role that came with an office overlooking the Potomac and a security detail My life was a whirlwind of high-level meetings and late-night sessions in the SIF. I had found a new family among my colleagues, a group of people who respected competence above all else. The shadow of Arthur Sterling had finally stopped darkening my doorstep and my heart. One Tuesday afternoon, a notification popped up on my secure terminal from a personal email address I hadn't seen in years. The subject line was short and lacked the usual aggressive tone of his communications. It simply said, "The Aegis Ghost Report," and I knew he had been reading the declassified summaries in the news. I hovered my mouse over the message, feeling a faint, ghostly tug of the little girl who just wanted a nod of approval. I opened the email and read the first few lines of his poorly constructed apology. He wrote about how he had been raised in a different time and how he didn't understand the new face of conflict. He mentioned that he was sorry for the way he had treated me at the Thund ceremony. It was the kind of letter a man writes when he realizes he has become irrelevant and needs a bridge back to the world. I read the words, but they didn't feel like they belonged to me anymore. They felt like a report on a mission that had been closed a long time ago. I thought about the $20 bill and the way he had told me to go buy coffee for the real soldiers. I thought about the years of being called a techie and a disappointment because I didn't want to drive a tank. The apology was a currency that had no value in the world I had built for myself. My validation didn't come from a retired general in a dusty house in Virginia. It came from the quiet, violet light of the security scanner and the safety of the nation I protected. I moved the cursor to the top of the screen and clicked the archive button without typing a single word in response. The message vanished, tucked away in a digital folder that I would likely never open again. I turned back to my team, who were waiting for my final sign-off on the next operation. We had a job to do, and there was no room for the ghosts of the past in a center built for the future. I felt a profound, quiet peace as I began the briefing, my voice steady and sure. True power isn't something you inherit from a name or a legacy, I thought, as the screens flickered to life. It is something you forge in the silence of your own dedication and the brilliance of your own mind. My father wanted a soldier for a daughter, and in the end, he got exactly what he asked for. He just didn't realize that the greatest soldiers of this century don't need a salute to know they've won. I smiled at my team, and we got back to work,